That is a bit bizarre. Okay. Morning, everyone. Sorry, everything, as always, even though I set everything up last night, it decides to play up a little bit. Like OBS tends to, as soon as you upgrade your system, it tends to muck up a bit, and it seemed to happen to me too. Let me just switch to... Now I can see what's going on. So thanks for joining me for my October live stream. And thanks, of course, to all my supporters who've been supporting me over the last, about a year and a half, year and a half or something like that. It's been, as always, a huge help. And I've just got a whole bunch more stuff coming in. Finally, I've just been slow on this Mr. Speaker's Ether 2, so they're in for review. And I'm trying to go do those fast because I want to get everything done before the November Tokyo show. November, the Tokyo Headphone Festival is on the first weekend of November, which by then they will have cleaned up all the big mess that has been made by the typhoon and combined typhoon, tornado. Well, tornado only affected a small area of one region, but thankfully nothing. It actually did flood part of central Tokyo. So they were down, not where I'm going to be at, but there's a river that runs through Tokyo. And they have these nice maps that show, like, if there's heavy rain, how badly the area will be flooded. And some areas near the river did get kind of overwhelmed. It broke the banks of the river at one area, and they got quite a bit of water come in. So the worst, of course, affected was Nagano, which the biggest danger with the rain is if you live in an area which is between two sets of mountains, because then when the rain runs down the mountains, if the river breaks its banks, which in this case the river bank itself actually broke, then the town gets flooded, and that's what happened in Nagano. And it took out an entire Shinkansen line, so it's going to be a long while before that's cleaned up. Let's see. So it's been down here. The typhoon was so big that even down here, where we were way outside the affected area, we were getting huge wind gusts. So that was massive. So to start with, I have some questions from people, which I'm going to answer. Then I'm going to pay attention to the chat. What I will do, I did find this cool thing I can do, which is I'll just show you here. I can put up the chat on the video, so people watching the video can see the questions. I wanted to post the questions that people asked me on the video, so that easy to follow. And then I realized, you can put a browser window in there, and then you can pop out the chat. So I worked out how to do that. So there you go. There's your chat. That should make it easier for people watching the video after the fact. So to start with, I have questions from various people. I'll just scroll down a little bit. I've set up a second computer so I can actually see without having to turn around. Sherry, who's been a good long-term supporter, has asked me about a beginner's guide to network streaming. Network streaming, that's a kind of tricky thing. It depends. To stream over a network, you obviously need some kind of protocol for it. So Apple made their own, which was AirPlay. AirPlay is limited in the resolution it will stream, which is kind of silly now given how fast networking is. I think they tend to limit stuff to make sure it's more reliable. So it was limited to basically not high res. I think 48 kilohertz, which is the most common the most common resolution of audio. CD quality was 44. Video tends to be 48 in general. So of course they made it just simple for, you have an Apple device or an AirPlay compatible device, and it just streams and it just works. The other one that came out was called DLNA, and that I don't know a lot about. It tends to be more well known, I think, in China. And DLNA it's much like, probably now everyone's familiar with Rune. You have a server, and then you have a client and an endpoint. Now the server, say, has all your music, your videos, and other stuff. The client is basically your control, your thing you're controlling everything from, and the endpoint is where it's output to, like a TV or a music system. And Especially with Roon, which is where it gets confusing. All three can be the same thing or different things. So, for example, Roon is on my Mini. It's just the server. All it does is just a drive there full of music. And then clients are like every computer I have in the house, and things like now even portable devices, like I have an M11 here with Roon on it, which I just use to stream out Roon. Just so I'm going to listen to music that I know is not stored on here, and it saves me having to load up a micro SD card with the latest stuff I'm listening to every time. So it makes it much more convenient. The endpoint, of course, this can be the endpoint as well as the client. So, but sometimes I have, say, a little microcomputer, the most well-known, which has got stickers on it, Raspberry Pi. I've got it in a little case here. Actually got a sticker on it to remind me what actually system is in there. You can actually get once if you can get a little system which you put on a micro SD card. You plug it straight in, and it becomes an instant Roon endpoint, and that's called ROPI, ROPI, and that will make an instant Roon endpoint. So you don't actually have to program anything. Although I use other systems, I don't mind, touching it, typing stuff into a terminal and fixing stuff up. This one is like just goes straight onto your network, and you plug it into from USB to your DAC or whatever, and there you have an instant Roon endpoint. So that's the kind of basic thing. Is depends what system. Roon endpoints are the most common and high end now. Roon, of course, is expensive for a lifetime. The simplest thing is, I think if you do buy like the annual subscription, and you do decide to go to lifetime, you can email them and they will discount off what you've already paid off a lifetime subscription. So if you do try it out, you don't have to decide, oh, I'm going to be slugged for this huge amount of money later on. No, you don't have to. If you've already been paying the annual subscription, you won't have to, as far as I know. Roon are pretty cool about that. It is expensive, but I found it in the end of stuff that I'm just going to pay for it, because Roon seems to just work if something is Roon compatible and it's common. It supports Tidal and Cobars, and that's kind of what you need. And it just works. And the cool thing is, if you have Dropbox, it can back up. If you have a large Dropbox, if you're paying for like a large Dropbox, I'm paying for what am I paying for? Is it 2 terabytes of Dropbox? I forget, 1 or 2. Then you can actually back up your entire, not the entire library, but you can back up the library, like the library database to Dropbox. So it's very handy to for that kind of thing. So streaming, it depends on what protocol everything supports. So Roon is now the most common for music, and DLNA is common, like I suppose common in China, but still readily available. But I'm not sure how I've only used it kind of briefly. For a lot of stuff does support that, so it depends what is supported and whether you want video or audio. For example, the video equivalent is usually Plex Media Server, which is if you want audio, music and video. That's common for. I've tried that briefly, but I didn't. That's actually paid as well. But as some people set that up in their house if they don't have, say, an Apple system. I have an Apple TV, so I don't need Plex. But the other thing I think you could readily buy. I mean, people were using these microcomputers for Plex too, so they're handy. The only thing that is terrible about them is you need good wireless. Obviously, you need good bandwidth. My wireless access point is on the wall over there. Downstairs to the TV, the Apple TV works really well. These things have terrible wireless built in, and then you have to find a compatible wireless card that will work with a particular system. So if you're not buying like an off-the-shelf system, which is like, this is designed for streaming, well, I suppose the Google stuff, like the Google, what's it called? I've lost it. The thing you plug into your TV. This is what happens if I do streaming in the morning. Then those things kind of just work. If you using, again, like aftermarket stuff, well, then it's kind of a little bit hit and miss trying to find the correct hardware. So probably the easiest thing, if you don't want to stuff around, is to buy, just decide on a particular system you want to use for streaming. The thing about video streaming options is they tend not to be geared towards audio. They don't have, they won't match the, if you have a mixture of high frequency files, they won't match the content, the frequency of the content, they just will resample or they won't adapt at all. The other thing is they won't support things like DSD. So if you want things like a full high-res and DSD support and know that it will work properly, you need something like Roon or something geared towards audio specifically. The video ones, I'm not sure. So if anyone out there has Plex, you can probably correct me on that. I haven't, again, decided not to go with Plex. So that's kind of the basic thing about streaming. You need to select whose protocol you're going to use and what you're going to use it for. And audio and video are different in that, what they're prioritized towards. And my simple answer: if you want audio, just pay for Roon. Let's see. The next question was from a new supporter, I think. Ormond. I don't know how to pronounce the nickname, but asked if I have a speaker setup, and probably unaware that I actually do have a speaker setup. Is my room clean enough for me to do a pan? Yes, we'll just do a pan. Give me a second. What I'll do is turn off the chat for a second, and I'll do a room sweep. Someone asked me to do this before, so I was going to go out of shot for a second. I think I can do this without breaking anything, because there's of course a slight risk that I will accidentally disconnect the camera, because it is of course mounted on a tripod. So you can see the room pan at the moment. Of course it's going to get knocked out by all the lights and stuff and things, which are sitting around here. I'll get the light out of the way. Which way is this going to go? It's going to be not in the way. It's going to be in the way. So that, I'm going to get the iPad out of the way too. Here's a really easy way to set stuff up in a room, is to get a whole bunch of clamps and other things, or lights and whatever, and just desk clamp stuff. That's the speaker setup. It's reasonably less messy than it was before, although it tends to have crap everywhere. I'm not as neat as Darko is, and I should be. I just have so much going on. Yes, and speakers tend to end up being used as places to put stuff, which I have nowhere else for, because the desk was covered in crap. And you can see a COS Electrostat box there, and I have COS Electrostats in from Massdrop. The pair of ELAC, what is it, 274 FS, 247? 247, sorry, I think 247. And you can't quite, so I'm not going to tilt the camera, because this was not mounted on a tripod that's designed to be moved. They have a ports at the bottom, so that it distributes the bass evenly, and you can see I put that shelf behind there to act as a bass trap, because the bass gets very boomy out of the back of these, and it's probably not ideally as tuned as ideally as it could be. And I've got an Audio GD Master 10, which is in the rack just below the printer, and that's the speaker setup. And sorry, I'm going to be a bit faint here because I've got a shotgun mic going on here. It's good. It's different from headphones. I don't turn it up as loud. Bit of a story there. When I was a child, my father had he had two speaker setups actually, one in the living room, one in his room. He wouldn't play loud. He had a thing. He would work during the day in his room, as I'm doing actually, like father, like son. And my setup actually here is very similar to how I set up my room, the same way that my father did. I can sit at the desk and work and get speaker playing across the room to me. And it was a very good system. And the thing is, he didn't like to be disturbed when he was concentrating. And so if like the neighbors were constructing, he'd get pissed off. And so consequently, he would not play music very loud, and neither would I. Now, my neighbors, I mean, they go out to work during the day, so it doesn't matter. I could play as loud as I want. Except, actually, no, behind me, just the wife is still in the house, and she's cleaning up all day. And we all have new houses with double glazed windows, so even if I turn the music up, I don't think she'd care. Or if she could hear to begin with, she probably wouldn't care. So unless she's got the windows open now, which it's autumn, so they'll be open. But as speakers go, probably once I see a lot of people on HeadFi, they would start off with headphones, and then as they go through college, and then they get a job, and then they get money, and then they get a bigger place, and then they get speakers, and then they bail out of HeadFi, mostly. Sometimes I really prefer using headphones, and sometimes speakers. I think if I want more impact, because I don't like turning them out of habit, since I was a child, not turning the music up loud. And when I had speakers in the house as a child, I couldn't turn them up loud because my father would get pissed off. Then I tend to use headphones. Though here, I think now the setup is pretty decent with, even when I do turn it up, probably the room is still not ideal. I could probably do with a couple more bass traps in the corners because the room is kind of a bit, not where the cupboards are. It kind of sticks out from the wall, so it adds more corners and places for reflection. But yeah, the other thing is with speakers is you have to set them up, or you either use speakers with sealed cabinets, or you use bookshelf speakers and a sub, or there's always some kind of stuffing around you have to do to get them to work in a room. And I had desk speakers for ages, just monitors, because that worked as near field was very cool. The only thing, you didn't get deep bass rumble, but I think with the rooms as it is now, there was a thought to get that little magnaplanar system where you have little speakers sitting on the desktop, which work best if you have nothing behind them, and apparently anyway, and which has a sub, and that would have worked fantastically. But I find that actually having the speakers is very good for testing imaging. I don't find that. I find that Focal's Utopias actually are very good for testing imaging depth and perception of that, so I can hear the difference between a chord DAC, which has perfect imaging depth, and say something like the IFIs, which have filters that make everything sound very forward. I can make that out, whereas with a lot of stuff you just wouldn't notice that with headphones. Only the Utopias do that really well, and speakers. So, but with the Master 10, is the Audio GD Master 10 like, say, the Master 9? Yes, it is. It's just kind of like the amp disappears and you just get the music. And that can be a little bit boring for some people. It's not a very exciting sound, but the new Audio GD circuit has distortion rolls off much more in the higher frequencies, so it sounds very especially with the ribbon, especially with the tweeters, the Hale tweeters in the LX, it's kind of a good match. They don't sound too bright. Whereas actually I liked LX with a good. There's some tube amps I heard them with. It did really enhance kind of the treble to some degree, but I kind of feel I would like tubes in there somewhere. But I mean, for just listening and testing DACs, it's been very good. Okay, so Jude, not the Headphone Jude, a different Jude, asked if I could explain the Shit Audio as Class A but not Class A. I recommend, as someone already said, reading Shit Happened about their new system, which was interesting because it's normally you'd have the Class A amps, as I've said, I've probably said this in every video. There are kind of two kinds of amps that people say are Class A. Sorry if I'm not reading the chat at the moment. I'll get back to that. You have, like, the Studio 6 is pure Class A. Once it reaches its limit, that's it, finished. It goes power up, dead. That's it. It has a wall. That's it, finished. Other Class A is actually Class AB, which is I'm pretty sure this would be count as that. You get amount of Class A power, and then it kind of slows down and goes into Class AB mode. And then you get, say, so many watts of Class A, usually half a watt to a watt, which is what you get with, probably about half. Most common amps is about half a watt to a watt that I've seen, and in Class A. And then when they say it can output, X number of watts, this says 9. So then it's not going to output 9 watts of Class A. It would be insanely hot. It would heat this room and it wouldn't be able to touch it. That Class A uses just a lot of power, so that makes so manufacturers cheat and they say our maximum power output of our Class A amp is, and then they give the Class AB output power. The problem has always been that the linearity goes Class A, Class A, Class A, Class AB, Class AB. So it kind of levels off. The power increase stops. And let's say you get, is unlikely to occur with a headphone amp. It would, a big speaker amp where you've got, big speakers and you're trying to reproduce the feeling of listening to an orchestra, would make a difference. I highly doubt it would make a difference with most amps like this. which is if you did get peaks in the music which went over the Class A, Class AB transition point, then they would kind of be truncated a bit and it would sound like crap. Not like crap, it would kind of compress. And again, in amps like this is just not going to happen. Maybe possibly with, I don't know, with HE6s, I don't think it would happen even then. I think the idea of, amps like this is that their Class A limit is so high that it's just not going to occur with headphones. So the idea of the continuity system Shit Audio had was that they used a system where, as it transitioned from Class A, there was no drop off. It would just, the linearity would continue. So linearity is everything in amps. And so far so good. I've got to shoot the S-Guard 3 video. That's worked really well too in that regard. It doesn't account for, this is only it has a decent but not, fairly basic power supply. It's not going to make the power supply in this perform as well as the power supply in this, but it does make the circuit perform more linear. Make the circuit more linear. If I can't say linearity in the morning, and that's the basic idea. And it means they can use amps which have less heat and less power output. More power output with less heat, basically, which can fit into a desktop thing. So this thing is massive. This thing is not. Obviously, this performs a lot better and has, but this is not mostly power supply, which is I'll probably get into a bit more in the Asgard review. The other questions. Let's see. Did I have anything? Okay. I'll switch to chat. Where's the chat gone? Let's bring back the chat. There we go. Now I can see what you're all saying. I'll switch on this one too so I can read what you're all saying. Bear with me a second. Now I can actually put it in a window. Yay! Oh, so good morning to Anthony Berryman. My friend has a 64 Audio A12T paired with his SP100M. And you have the AK380 copper. That was interesting, the good old AK380, and I have one floating around somewhere. The copper one, weirdly, sounded nicer. Only very slightly. I don't know why. I think that was a very heavy... A friend said, I was in Tokyo, and he said, go try out my AK380 copper and with amp module. And I said, carry that around for a while. Oh, this thing is so heavy. And it just like, this thing was heavier than my camera rig. That was insane. Carrying around a camera was painful enough. Carrying around that for a while, it's like, yeah, it sounds fantastic, but God, it's like you'd only ever plant it on your desktop. It would be like, yeah, it was crazy, but it was good sounding. So I have to try the new AK stuff. I should organize that, but it's a little bit hard being in Japan, and I'm not very friendly with the distributor. I haven't sucked up to the distributor enough to let them lend me stuff. Oh yes, and 10 p.m. in the UK. I have relatives in the UK. Most of my relatives are in the UK, so it's always confusing me, the time zones. It's like, oh, I feel I need to call a relative, and it's like, oh crap, it's the middle of the night. Okay, I'm just gonna catch up on all your chat here. Do you interesting question. From Mid Fidelity, do you consider HRTF as a good source in rating the fidelity of a headphone? Would you consider that in future reviews? That sounds to me like can you read graphs and decide if headphones are any good? And the answer is no. Oh, that's so complex. Tile, come back. No, Tile must be having a great time. He hasn't appeared anywhere in any headphone thing anywhere except briefly. He must be having a great time in his van. I don't blame him. I remember quitting when you quit something you've been at for a very long time, you got to keep coming back saying, "Oh, kind of missing it," and then after a while you just don't miss it. So it's like he can have fun out under the stars and meet people and relax and chill and have fun, or he can come back online and deal with all the crap we deal with online. Easy choice. Yeah. It's not only is it what I know is complex, but even what I know is out there about headphones and HRTF and frequency response and all that stuff is even way more complex. There are two, for me, I'm trying to see if I can summarize this without, in a way that's not, in a reasonable way. For me, I'll tell you an interesting story, and that kind of summarizes it, and that's with the Focal Utopias. So the Focal Utopias have a reputation for having, they don't give a sense of wide soundstage, but they do give a very sense of depth. If you plug them into a Hugo 2 or something like that, you understand what real depth sounds like, which is the amazing thing about what Rob Watts did with Chord, but that's another story. The interesting thing is I had in this software, what was it called? I've forgotten the name because I just had to reinstall it, which makes your headphone frequency response flat. So it has profiles for all headphones. Now, of course, headphones have variants, but essentially they have profiles based on an averaging of so many dozen, a dozen or something versions of various headphones. And then they use that to, you click a button and your frequency response becomes flat, or they can make it slightly V-shaped to make it a little bit nicer. So I tried this with the Utopias, and I just got this software and they sent me a profile they're working on for the Utopias. Now Utopias are available. If someone remembers what it is, I'll post it. I'll post it later. And the software, and so that was very interesting because now then the Utopias with that engaged don't have a normal wide soundstage, but the depth disappeared. It just became flat. And I noticed that because Utopias, have a great sense of depth, but it disappeared once you flatten the frequency response. Let's ignore the fact that it's a digital reprocessing and their digital filters were kind of crap, and you could hear like it distorted the music, not in the normal sense, but I have a Hugo 2 and I'm direct to Utopias. I noticed that there was instruments that had obviously been through a digital filter, and just putting that aside, that was an interesting experience of how much the frequency response affects perception of soundstage. So there's group delay as well, which is I need to review, which is how much the 3D things like CAMS 3D and what's that other one that guy was always at the shows demoing, the 3D effect, 3D from 2D effect systems all use, they delay. Frequencies are delayed slightly to give you the perception of sounds coming from further away or whatever. There's all sorts of trickery involved in this, and it's interesting research. And but that's, but you can't. I mean, you can probably tell. The interesting thing was looking at the Odyssey LCD2s when they were first measured by Tile, and they had this awesome square wave response. But if you listen to LCD2s and LCD3s, which had very similar measurements, the LCD3s were clearly more detailed. So there was nothing in the measurements that could show how detailed the actual resolving ability of headphones are. I think it's something that has to be measured over time, and I think the problem with most measurements are just instantaneous measurements or sweeps. And I'm going to talk about electronics when I finally get around to shooting the review of the AAA 789. Is that measurements don't account for over time, and a lot of stuff and music plays over time, which is where there's a disparity between measurements taken. I mean, an impulse response shows over time, but it's just one impulse response. Remember, there are you'd have to have impulse responses probably over a whole huge range of frequencies, and then work out some kind of way of averaging the amount of distortion. I don't know. You'd have to find a way of trying to correlate what we perceive versus what is measured. And a lot of it, I think, is the issue is with stuff happening over time, which is just not commonly measured or not measured extensively. So that's why I think you can get some kind of ideas, like if you see a pair of headphones and their frequency response has this massive mountain, well, there's going to be a lot of bass. But it's like with IEMs, the FH7s look like they had fairly flat bass, but they sound like they have a lot more bass than they do measured. So it's not a simple thing. It's also, of course, how is that bass relative to the other frequency peaks and music, and you can get bits and pieces of an idea, but still not much. And there's measurements were designed for the manufacturer to test whether stuff was working or not. They weren't designed for customers to look at and judge things. So they were never oriented towards that. So that's kind of my long answer. Okay. Thank you for Nick, who pointed out that Rune will only credit you for the first year, not subsequent ones. So if you do try their system for a year and you decide to go lifetime, they'll credit you for the first year. I thought there was longer, but I might be wrong. Can I make a video on how set up the M scaler in Hugo 2? That's easy. I can do that in about 30 seconds. Do you see this? This is a headphone socket to RCA adapter. It has exactly the same pinout as Chord's Hugo 2 digital input. That's the coax 1, that's coax 2. Done. Rob Watts was clever. A clever design. You just use a normal RCA adapter and it has the same pinout as the coax. That's what I do. I have a different adapter, but that's what I use normally. And you just need that and a couple of and a set of RCA cables, preferably ones that are 75 ohm. I don't think it makes with the Hugo 2. Yeah, you probably should anyway. Okay, so just find out. All the chat is in really small text and I can't see. Oh, there we go. I'll make it bigger. Digital Living Network Alliance, yes, DLNA. So I'm probably way behind where all you are. I'm just still scrolling through. Where does it say on the screen I'm up to? Chrome, I'm up to, okay. Okay, now I've caught up to the top of what you can see on screen now, to where Alok talks about Chromecast. Okay, let's just find out what you're all. Have I listened to the RME ADI DAC 2? Yes, once in Tokyo. Sounded all right. It was headphones I wasn't familiar with recently, so same thing as I said about DAC measurements. The interesting thing about DAC measurements are that if you have a non-oversampling DAC, they measure like utter crap. I mean, like seriously, like broken, technically broken. But they sound, most of it you don't even notice. It was only, I think, with like, say, for example, Shit Audio's Modi Multibit, which measures like crap as well. And it was only, it's still like, and unless I plugged it into something like the Master 9, and then I could hear the distortion clearly with a good, high-end pair of headphones. It is really amazing how badly stuff has to be broken before it actually sounds. Probably the distortion from lack of oversampling in a non-oversampling DAC, and not the multi-bit, that's different. Only that, it can sound rolled off, but it's amazing how broken something has to be, and it still is kind of reasonably resolving, although non-oversampling DACs tend to mask detail to some degree. It's really amazing because the measurements are, say, like one of the common measurements is to put white noise through and then measure the frequency output of that. But a lot of music, people buy, say, non-oversampling DACs because they want to listen to, say, they prefer it with classical or piano or things like that, which have, they're not complex. And I think when music gets complex, that's when the distortion will start to, that's in the system will start to become prevalent. But they sound kind of nice and pleasant and a bit rolled off with instruments. So maybe that distortion doesn't show up so readily then as it would with a white noise measurement. So, and then the high frequency stuff is probably, you're not going to hear it anyway, although it's probably not good for your speakers, or might not be good for your system. Or you might play high res through it, which as soon as you play, say, a 2496K file through a non-oversampling DAC, it's equivalent to like 2 times oversampling, so it just knocks out all the distortion. But measurements, yeah, I mean, someone made the point that, we have this AAA 789. Of course, that's an amp, but I mean, talking about measurements, it says, the measurements, the noise floor is minus 140 dB. It's like, well, so what? The difference between minus 120 and minus 140, you can't hear that. It's like it's like microvolts of stuff. It's just not, it's nothing. It's beyond nothing, way below nothing. So a lot of the stuff, like if you have a 1 kilohertz signal and there's a 1 kilohertz Shed Audio posted measurements of the Bifrost 2, and they put through a 1 kilohertz signal, and above that there was a whole lot of minus 90 dB. Was it minus 90 dB tones? You're not going to notice that. If the music's at fairly high, especially like compressed music, you're not going to notice the distortion that any of it that the DAC causes. Most of it's fairly irrelevant. So that's my thought on measurements. I mean, you can see like stuff is, the stuff that measures best tends to be the chord gear, but it's not the measurements just alone. It's specific things that, say, Rob Watts hunted down, that he said worked out that specific measurements correlated to specific issues with our perception of music. Noise floor modulation, for example. So that, I think it's, again, measurements are a thing for the manufacturer to look at stuff. It's kind of not really useful for us. It's like, okay, this DAC, there's a little bit of power ground loop hum in there. It's like, you're probably not going to notice it. No way. The useful measurement, okay, I'll give you a secret. The useful measurement is crosstalk. All the others you can fairly ignore. The crosstalk measurement will tell you how something will sound. And nobody notices the crosstalk measurements, but actually it does. And I noticed this with the Yggdrasil Analog 2, which again, one of those things I should shoot a review of, but I have to pull it out of my rack and pull it apart ideally to do, but I could probably not do that. I noticed that in some music there was a slight bass hump, and I was like, really? And it wasn't with all music, but comparing A being the Hugo 2. So I went through Shed Audio's measurements, and then the crosstalk sort of goes in the bass, and then goes through various curves. Oh, there's a bump in the mid bass, very slight in the crosstalk, but that must be where my perception of it came from. And so you'll find that a lot of stuff has slightly V-shaped crosstalk, and that stuff tends to have a reputation for having a nice, good soundstage, because some tubes, tube amps say, oh, the soundstage in this tube amp is amazing. And you see the tube to crosstalk is slightly V-shaped, and you can emulate this in electronics very easily. It's been done. You could buy discrete op amps which had, in the difference between the measurements of them was like one was flat and one was a bit funky, and then which had an interesting sound, and they're all designed to emulate tubes. One was designed to be dead flat, one was designed to emulate tube sound, which is slightly V-shaped crosstalk. And it's in electronics, it's how you design the circuit. It's stuff you can tweak, and by the arrangement of the transistors and other factors of the arrangement of the circuit. So my hint is, look at the crosstalk measurements. It'll tell you more about how something sounds than anything else. And it only subtly, but that's what manufacturers do. And I'm surprised no one's actually commented on it before. I think the last time I saw... No, I've never seen it. Discussion of that. I spotted it and worked it out. Maybe someone else must have realized it before, but I just never have seen anyone talk about it. So crosstalk measurements were probably more useful than anything else for the average consumer. Scrolling, and why has it jumped up? My welcome to the chat thing has appeared in my screen in the middle. Why? But not appeared in yours. It's bizarre. Okay, so Pandemonium has asked me about Stax Omega 2 Mark 1s. Yes, they are considering a 0070 or a Blue Hawaii. If you can afford a Blue Hawaii, buy a Blue Hawaii. And this is the problem with stats. I got the cost set in here from Massdrop, which is going to, I want to review quickly, hopefully. And the problem with stats is that they require high voltages, and to make a high voltage and keep, amps basically, have a power supply, and then the power supply has usually some degree of capacitance to store energy for when the peaks in the music. And usually most power, when you go into speakers, you need current, so it has to be able to store a lot of power current. With electrostatic, it's voltage, so it's voltage peaks. So it's a bit of a different circuit design. You do have to have crazy high voltages in there. Of course, the current is extremely low. It's very extremely low, but it's extremely high voltages. And the problem has been that high voltage components have gone out of style since TVs, started going to LCD. The old style TVs had high voltage components, but the transistors which could handle high voltages kind of just disappeared. And so the best way is, of course, tubes, or, well, you can still, you can still buy Blue Hawaiis, which are a hybrid amp. And so the voltages do high voltage. Tubes do high voltage. And so you either have to get a really high-end tube amp, you either have to, there are, only 3 or 4 manufacturers for one, or there are a whole bunch. You have to find some DIY who isn't going to rip you off to build one of the common DIY designs, which are impossible to make commercial because the quantities required and the quantities required of the components are just not enough to do. Or you beg Jason Soder from shit to actually make the stat amp he designed, which I have to go and badger him to do that. Or you buy a Blue Hawaii, which is probably the cost of a Blue Hawaii. It should be a $20,000 amp. If it were a genuine regular commercial amp, it would be 20 grand. So go and buy a Blue Hawaii. Be happy that you can get it for only $6 grand, I think it is now. So yeah, they need very high voltage, and that means a lot of very high quality components and design. And yeah, there are a lot of factors that make it extremely difficult to do a good electrostat amp. And so, there's a cheap transformer box in there, and for the costs. And if you don't like listening, the problem with stats, if you like listening loud, you need tons of power. And if you like listening quietly, they're really, really nice, and you don't need a lot of power. But as soon as you turn the volume up, it becomes a big issue. So power is always the issue in audio. But no, 0070 is going to be like no improvement over what you're using now. You need a Blue Hawaii or this new Stax amp, and probably the Blue Hawaii is probably the better amp. Because Stax, again, were limited to something they could make commercially, which with the T8000, and so they were limited to what tubes they could use and what circuit they could use. As the HE1000 details the Utopia, I thought the HE1000 was very, very, very slightly behind the Utopias, but I listen to a lot of good music, so. It depends what you listen to and what you have. I'm a bit of a detail junkie, but I really like your HE1000 V2s. I kind of regret not having them anymore. I have $1,200 saved up for a DAC. Should I keep saving for a Q test? If you've been enjoying the Mojo, then yeah, the Q test is just kind of more detailed, but it depends. I suppose then you have flexibility on amps. I suppose it depends what you're setting out to do, what you're setting out to plug it in to, because the Q test is just a DAC, so you need an amp to go with it. But yeah, especially if you, I'm pairing up the Hugo 2, which is equivalent to a Q test in many respects, with the Studio 6, and that makes for a nice combination. Or you could just, if you need portability, get a Hugo 2. How is the 789 compared to the Master 9? The 789 is very detailed, but the dynamics of the 789 are not as good as a higher end amp like the Holo Azure or the Master 9. I think that's where these strong negative feedback circuits, which are designed to measure well, do not work so well, is that they don't have the dynamics of bigger amps. But I mean, it's not that the Master 9 is all those big. There's you're paying 4 times the price for a little bit more detail and a bit better dynamics. So value-wise, the 789 is fantastic. So that's basically it. But it's interesting to make. I find it interesting that a manufacturer makes a design designed to be measure as best as possible and how that results. So it's an exercise in that. I find it very interesting. What's the story with really weak Wi-Fi that renders some apps like the Fio X71 generation high alpha? The signal is so bad you can't use them. The deal is they fixed it in the M11. There's your answer. Yeah, well, have you ever seen pictures of a testing facility for that mobile phone manufacturers use, like Apple? When they had Antenna Gate for the iPhone 4, they released pictures of their testing facility. To actually get Wi-Fi, remember you can't just like with how can I say? Let's say you pick a speak. Let's just forget Wi-Fi for a moment. When they test speakers, they put them in a correct chamber, which these are freaky if you ever get to go in one because sound only goes in one direction. You talk to someone, you start talking in any other direction, and sound just disappears. It's really, really freaky. But they test them and then they put a bunch of microphones to see how the sound spreads around there. It's invisible. The sound is invisible, so they have to measure it. The other thing is the same thing with mobile phones. They put them in a special chamber which absorbs all radio signals, and then they test, with transmission from different points, and they have all these freaky things. I've seen noise cancelling headphone test chambers too. They are very interesting, and I couldn't take photos because it was proprietary. And I shouldn't even say where I saw them because I wasn't supposed to be there. Testing these things is very difficult. How do you test wireless? How do you know if the wireless is transmitting? Should I just put a lot of these things just had the Bluetooth transmitter had a little bit of wire sticking out, and then just a plastic plate on there so that it wouldn't block it. And obviously that was not good enough. I remember I had an AK240 and it would not download stuff. I think it was firmware updates over the air. I can't remember what I was downloading with it, unless it was like sitting next to my wireless access point. The manufacturers for a long time were very, like Fio and Hybee and all that, were very lazy about how they did wireless. You open them up and literally it was just, there's the Bluetooth transmitter receiver, and there is just a bit of metal wire sticking out. To act as the aerial, and it's like, that's hopeless. And now they've fixed that obviously in the M11 because this thing worked down in the worst part of my house, which is worst for wireless, which is pretty amazing. Where even, actually I have a Hugo down there, original called Hugo, and if you put something even 2 meters away, going Bluetooth to it, and you walk between them, then it drops out. So wireless is just needs actual research and testing to get working well. So the manufacturers probably just didn't do that at all, and they were just lazy about it. And now they've stopped being lazy. So yeah, it's not a simple thing to do, and it requires money and setup and space and time and a lot of effort and testing and knowledge. So that's, I guess, what they've started overcoming. What high-end IM would you recommend for someone with small ears? Yeah, that's a problem. My wife has small ears and nothing fits her except these tiny tip things. Talk to the head pie guy. What's his name? Damien, head pie. He has really small ears as well. So you can find tips. Probably if you're going to get high-end IMs, probably a custom IM would probably solve the problem. But if you I think a custom IM, you can get really small tips. The Shozy, not Zero, what was it, the one I reviewed? CP2, had these tiny tips, which were obviously for Asian people, which not just small, but extra small tips. I've got it floating around here somewhere. They so if you can probably find extra small tips for your IMs and try them. But yeah, and also Andromedas had really huge A lot of IMs these days, to have multiple ports, have like 5.5 millimeter wide bores. The Shure have stuff with a single nozzle. I can't say I recommend it. Yeah, try some stuff that you're going to enjoy listening with. I'm trying to find stuff that has a narrow nozzle. There isn't a lot these days. Single nozzle IMs are kind of rare. Shure was the last kind, but that was their mid-range stuff. I don't remember what the high-end stuff was like. Yeah, it was so long since I've listened. Custom IMs might be the go in that case, because then you can do a narrow nozzle. Other ones with narrow nozzle are JH Audio. Actually have narrow nozzle now. I think that's down to 5 millimeter or below, so you can use that might be the go. But JH Audio stuff tends to be geared towards musicians and a little bit dark. A little bit kind of like the old Odyssey house sound. Yeah, it's a tricky one. If you have small ears, Damon from Headpie has tried a lot of stuff, so he might know. He's around. You can find him on Headpie. What else are we having a look at? Okay. And it jumped on me. Good question here. Very important question. I don't understand why every time I hear someone don't like the Focal Utopia, they usually like the headphones I don't like, is that those people have different preference with the sound they hear. The answer to that is very simple. They listen to different music. The best advice I ever saw on buying headphones anyway, was to find someone who likes the same music you do, and then see what they own. So again, like say, I listen to jazz. Well, if I listen to jazz, I have certain headphones that are going to sound really good with that. If you have someone who listens to hip hop, the music, the headphones they're going to prefer are going to be completely different. A funny story, a guy I was talking to online had custom built his own headphones using the aftermarket drivers available from Symphones, which I have actually a pair sitting here. The original aluminium ones, which nobody will have heard of. And modified Grados, actually. They took the Grado cups, and one of the guys kindly made me a little wood ring insert. And they used special aluminium sleeves with these special custom drivers, which were like Grados. So they originally designed to emulate the old metal Grados. So these were actually originally Alessandro MS2s, but they are no longer. Anyway, you can't get these aluminium versions anymore, but people were making wood cups for me. There's many people out there. The guy who did these cool rings for me actually does make wood cups. And this guy made his own, and he made them, tune them perfectly. And he said, I think he played violin. He might have played violin. And he said, all headphones these days don't sound how the artist intended. They all sound like distorted, blah, 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 blah. He ranted on for a while about it and said, well, okay, so you think all headphones are rubbish because they don't sound as the artist intended and what you built does? He goes, yes. So, okay, I know Val from V-Moda, so the first time I heard his M80s, he said, try these out. And I said, the treble's very rolled off. And so it wasn't really a good match with, say, classical or jazz, which I liked, or even a lot of pop. Well, pop music was all right. And he said, and then he has the LP ones, which were popular with DJs, for example. And he said, no, come listen to some of my music. So he put these things on my head. The music he played is so funny because of some of the lyrics in it. But he played this club music, and he turned the volume up, and that kicked ass. And it's like, well, that's what DJs hear. That's the kind of music they buy these headphones to play back with, and they don't have a sharp treble peak because when they turn the volume up, that treble peak will then damage your hearing because this music is already very bright. And that's as the artist intended. So obviously they're hopeless. This guy who complained about headphones being all wrong, which is a valid complaint from one perspective, said that talked about as the artist intended, but So what Val was making was for playing the music as the artist intended, like club sound in your head. But of course, the headphones would be vastly different. So, um, you know what? Yeah, it's that's kind of really that kind of really drove it home. Is that what matches well is really important. Really depends on the music that you listen to. So I have that a lot with a lot of I say IEMs or headphones may roll off the deep bass and they won't get that deep bass rumble. Not a lot of music really has or needs to have deep bass rumble. There's not a lot of I mean some hip hop maybe if you want that there are headphones that do that. To do that cleanly where you need good planar headphones old headphones like the HD6XX, the HD650, that era of headphones rolled off the deep bass because otherwise the distortion just shot up. If they tried to make it flat, the distortion would be so high it would interfere with the music, and because those small drivers just couldn't handle it. So, losing my train of thought here. So a lot of it comes down to the music, what you require, and that's really tricky because when I do my headphone reviews, I have a playlist and I try and cover as many different situational, different kinds of. Well, I can't carry a lot of genres, but I can carry enough that I can say that people should be able to extrapolate whether the pair of headphones or IEMs actually sound good with the music they like. So they know, like, sure, the new basement tapes where I did my deep bass rumble test, hardly anyone will listen to that. But if they know I say, well, the deep bass rumble isn't that strong, then if they do like stuff with deep bass rumble, they'll go, no, okay, then I know these headphones or IEMs are not for me. Then if I do, the Sophie Tucker track, then, I could test the mid bass, whether it's entertaining with those. Massive Attack's Angel is very interesting because you'd think that bass strength is where it's where it makes it sound good, but it's actually a lot like Spongel in that it's not about the deep bass. Actually, a lot of a Massive Attack's Angel is interesting. It's not about the bass at all. It's actually about the mid range. So it's really fascinating that I should be able to cover enough that you can kind of figure out whether some headphones will work really well with the kind of music you like. But it does require a knowing, is your music, is it compressed? Is it very bright or is it very dark? Like old pop music has absolutely stuff all bass, but is quite bright. Old pop music, that is kind of 70s, 80s stuff, just wasn't recorded with that much bass. Maybe possibly because it was often put onto LP, which you can't have too much bass, otherwise the needle will jump. There's another long story. So, whereas a friend of mine who likes 80s pop music, interesting guy, he liked the Odyssey planar sound because it balanced that out nicely, for example. And it's very dependent on, do you want forward mids or not forward mids? Forward mids to bring out vocals and instruments, or you don't care about that so much. You just want the feeling where you want the bass thump and all that. The treble, how much, is it too much? If your other thing is your hearing has a null between 8 and 10 kilohertz. So if you have a pair of headphones with an 8 kilohertz peak and your null is at 8 kilohertz, you're not going to find those headphones bright. But someone else whose null is, say, at 10 kilohertz or closer to 10 kilohertz, they're going to hear those headphones as very bright. So the hearing null, which is not talked about much, and the music is most of it. Let me see. Okay. Long answer to a short question. What's your thought on the KGSS Stax amps? I haven't tried extensively a KGSS, but I mean, if you can find a builder who will make one and not rip you off, and I emphasize this, who will A, not rip you off, and not make something electrically dangerous, then they'll still be good amps. They still can swing a good voltage, but the KGSS, there's a few varieties out there, and depending on the design, how much voltage they'll put out is very important. But I was going to build one and I didn't get round to it because every time I try to build anything here, my table gets taken over by other stuff. I don't know how specifically they compare to the Blue Hawaii. It depends, it depends on the build and who does it and which version, and that's going to make a difference. So there are other people who are way more versed in that. So you should probably ask them. But it's interesting. Yeah, stacks are interesting. If you've never heard stacks, it's interesting to try some kind of electrostats. And if you like listening quietly and you like, delicacy and detail, they're really good. If you like impact, then you're either going to be spending an absolute crap load of money on them. You're going to be spending at least you're going to be spending around 10 grand for a system because you need one of the high end amps, or don't bother. That's what a lot of planers have caught up. Obviously, to me, the Utopias were only slightly behind the stack system I reviewed. And, I missed the stack system, but, I realistically, as I said this before, why have one amp I can only use with one pair of headphones and one pair of headphones I can only use with one amp? And then if there's some incompatible genre of music, well, then I'm stuck anyway. And then most of the music, a lot of the music I like just isn't like well recorded enough to value being listened with stacks. What are my thoughts on the Fostex TRX? The Ebony Fostex. They had 3 different woods, and I remember they all sounded slightly different. And I like Ebony, but I think one of them they all sounded a slightly different between levels of V shape. I like the, what was it? The TH 600 I thought had the best balance, but this was like 3 years ago I tried them. So when I was in a meet, I didn't like I think the Ebony had a fairly flat sound signature. I actually prefer the Fostex sound rather than the Mastrop ones. So the TH600, I think it was, I like that. Slightly V-shaped, and that was what worked best, but not too V-shaped like the TH900s. And I think that was kind of the best all-rounder for me. Okay. I love that Utopia has become the new HD800 go-to headphone to compare it to everything. Yeah, there's always someone sets a standard. It's really funny how that happens, but it's everywhere. Everyone's heard them now. It's really funny at the shows how, like, especially the Tokyo show, what is the go-to headphone? So if you go around to all the rigs, what does everyone have? And it was HD800s for a while. I think it's the Utopias now. I'm not sure. It's kind of spread out a bit. I'm gonna let in. Sorry, there's someone. Just a note: if you post anything with swearing in it, it automatically hides it. Have you ever listened to a Dave with an upscaler? That is crazy. Yes. Just the Dave by itself with headphones was pretty intense. I did write a Dave review. I never shot one. I'd like to try actually a Dave and Bluetooth or the M scaler with a full-sized high-end speaker system would be very interesting. Is power condition necessary? Everyone keeps asking me about power. Why? Okay. Asgard 3. Master 9. Difference? This is mostly power supply. This is mostly not power supply. The interesting thing, Kingwa from Audio GD, he makes versions of his high-end amps with power conditioners built in, so regenerator, and they use way more power. And he reckons they're twice. The figure he uses is like if he actually has said that he thinks they're twice as good as the non-regenerated versions. That's a big statement from him, and he's very conservative about how he comments on stuff. He will not upsell people. He will tell you, this isn't worth it. He's the kind of guy who will say, no, don't bother spending this much money. He's one of the good guys in audio. And if he's saying twice as much, that's a big deal. So, power supply everything's power in electronics. Everything is power supply. So it can make a lot of necessary as well. How much do you want to destroy your wallet? This is the irritating thing. Someone was asking me about why did I put a fancy power cord on my power conditioner? Why is it still making a difference? And I just said I don't want to answer that because I have no idea. This is one of those things that someone really needs to sit down and measure and work out what noise is what interfering with what electronics, because these things, let's say I'm in an apartment, we'll just say in central New York, and this is just a guess, or central Tokyo, or some big city where the power supply is coming in going through to multiple apartments, buildings, everything like that. There's it's absolute crap ton of electronics involved. All around there's wireless transmitting. You go to Central City and you see like 24 wireless access points in the local area, and so many opportunities for interference and issues. Versus me sitting out in the middle of not quite nowhere where it's dead quiet. Actually, there's about 5% distortion on my power supply according to my power plant premier, and where it's relatively quiet during the day electronically. Everyone has a wireless access point, but maybe it doesn't interfere that much because the distance is bigger. Or how much of an effect does that have? There's just no one has actually researched it thoroughly, and that research like that requires money. It'd be interesting to actually do and then measure how much noise is coming through power lines, how much is getting through systems, what does it pass through, what frequency is it? Is it in the megahertz range, kilohertz range? What's going on? Is it causing kind of modulation with audio frequencies? What's it doing to electronics? It's not obviously it's something that requires a lot of proper research to answer. So it's voodoo until someone does that. And that's what really sucks about power, is that you do stuff like that, like, oh, let's change a power cable, it shouldn't make any difference. It's like, wow, that sounds better. It's like, well, does that mean the power supply in my thing is, if I change the power cable on this and it sounds different, does this mean that the power supply in here is crap? No, of course it's got a very good power supply, but what's going on? It's stupid and irritating because there's obviously some science behind it, but nobody has gone. The people who have pay money to figure out what it is are the manufacturers of super boutique expensive power cables, or maybe they do, or maybe they don't. I don't know, and they don't reveal any of this, and they just say it works better, and then it causes all these stupid arguments online. It requires someone to go out and figure out what's going on, and the only logical explanation that matches with science I've heard is that high frequency noise, the longer a high frequency resisting power cable is, the more high frequency noise will be knocked out. And assuming that gets through the system somehow into and affects and maybe modulates the noise of the amp output, I don't know. That's the only one that seems to make any sense. Which is why if you have a good power cable with shielding, it should be at least 1.5 meters or whatever that is, 6 feet long, 5 feet long, to filter out high frequency noise. That's the idea, supposedly. So I don't know. No one's done proper experiments on it that have been posted, and it requires someone without a bias who is interested in actually finding out what's going on, and working on it. And when you find companies that do that, like Chord did with working out what actual measurements correlate to what sound perception of depth and all that kind of thing, then you actually get results. Do I think Sony's going to update their flagship DAPs? No idea whatsoever, but eventually, because of electronics and the way these things go, they're going to have to, because the available parts and components can change over time, and maybe the market will change, or maybe if sales start dropping off, then they'll have to do something new anyway. Sony. Sony's a big company, and Japanese companies move very slowly. You don't get jumped. Also, Sony didn't have a lot of money for a long time. They were in the red. When a company's in the red, they are limited to what they can do. So for a long time, what they could do was kind of very stuck. And now they actually come back. Now they can start breaking out the high-end stuff, and now things are getting interesting. Okay, we're down to the bottom of the chat, I think. I'm going to check. Are we there? Yes, we're there. Okay. Are you going to review the new M11 Pro? Well, I hope so. Theo keeps sending me stuff, so I guess so. I don't know if it's going to come out. I mean, people came out with said, "Oh, they've released the M11 Pro." It's like, no, they haven't. They just announced it. They didn't even really announce it. People just start posting that it was available. It's like, it's not. And then someone supposedly said they had one. They said, "Well, are you living in China?" Because they release a limited number in China. And then if there are issues, they solve those issues. So by the time you get it, it's already up to version 1.05 of the software, and it's generally all this. They've learned that coming out with a good impression early is better than coming out with stuff which is like, I just upgraded all my Macs to macOS Catalina, and I have to launch OBS using a special terminal command to get it to work. So having all that kind of fun, yeah, nobody likes that, buying a product. Can I recommend some open back headphones that sound very clean and clear? HE400i. Yeah, I see a lot of people with those. Those I have the Sundara. I haven't tried the HE400i, but I like the Sundaras. So you can get they turn up around 350. I think they're available for around 350. If you're going Hi-Fi Man, of course, with the usual caution that they have a not so perfect reputation with quality control. But I generally like if you very industrial looking Sundaras, which are floating around here somewhere. Oh, they're hanging back there. Actually, I kind of really like how they sound. And they can, if you do go around playing with aftermarket cables, or you need a different cable, they use 3.5 millimeter connectors, so it's very easy to get a different cable if you need one. Is there a desk amp with the volume knob on the top instead of the front? That's an interesting question. It can be done, and I think I've seen it done, but it's rare because of the chassis costs make it a pain in the butt to do that kind of thing. So generally, if one exists, I don't remember off the top of my head. Someone may... there has been one sometime. Was it? There are ones where... there are some designs where the volume knob was so big, it kind of hit the top of the chassis. So the volume knob was so large, you could... That's about the only one I remember. But yeah, it's chassis design hell if people want to do that. So generally, it's rare to see that. Some binaural 8D recordings can make the sound feel like it's... Yes. No, it's not different when we discuss soundstage because... different... perception of soundstage is really complex, but it's not different really in that because the effect of putting the microphones where someone's ears are will cause, how when the sounds hit the microphones, and the binaural recordings are often done with a dummy head which actually has ears. It's actually using a measurement head. I think it uses a measurement head with dummy ears. And so when sounds hit your ears affect how you perceive soundstage. So that's why timing is so important, and why people in digital even talk about timing a lot. And so I mean, again, what I recommend people do is listen to a pair of Focal Utopias out of a Hugo 2 or another Chord DAC if you want to understand how, without using speakers, that is, what actual depth sounds like. And it's completely clear. And so you do notice that a lot of the stuff, if you've written up, say, by Rob Watts and written up about, Tile wrote a lot of stuff about it, depth perception, a lot of the stuff about binaural that goes into that, but about when sounds hit your ears is very important about perception of soundstage. But, there's fake perception of soundstage where you adjust the frequency response to give you that effect, but which slightly convinces your brain that there is a soundstage. Yeah, it's a complex thing, and it's above my pay grade. So, have you heard the EL amp? No, sorry. Did you see Sony's $8,000 portable DAC amp player? Yes, I even found there's actually a portable case for it made by a company called Van Nuys in Japan. If you see my, go back and check my last spring, hold on, I'm going to get my brain around the right way. Spring Headphone Festival video actually found a case for for a portable case for it. That's not a joke. It actually does exist. Yeah. It sounded all right. I mean, I maybe I can borrow one sometime and review it. It would be really cool. Thank you for considering joining the membership program. Also, if anyone did appreciate, you can also send a super chat too. That'd be really cool. But yeah, if you want advice, consider becoming a member, and for a couple of bucks a month even, I happily ask questions, and that really helps me out, help you out. That everyone benefits, which is what I like. Which is how I try and do my reviews. It's like, this hopefully is useful for somebody so that they can go, this is going to be a good product for me, or this is not right for me. And people have said that to me, that I've described stuff in a way that they can go, this is not what I'm looking for. And that actually benefits the manufacturers too, because manufacturers don't like stuff that's over... I think they don't like people buying their stuff that don't like it. They want the people who want their stuff to buy it. who are going to use it, who are going to enjoy it. If you have people complaining because someone said this is the greatest thing since sliced bread when it's not, then people get angry, and it actually works against their favor, because people, this before the internet, happy customers would tell on average about 2 people, and unhappy customers for a store would tell on average about 8 people. And with the internet, negativity is multiplied, as we've seen in recent years. So it's actually in the manufacturer's interest to have an accurate reviews of their stuff, which have the customers who will want that stuff to buy it, and the customers who will not be suited to buying it will not buy it. So something important to remember, that with all the flack reviewers tend to get, that actually I think some reviewers are obviously so worried about pissing off manufacturers with what they say that they will not say negative stuff. Whereas, it's not hard to say, the goods and bad points about stuff. It being realistic actually benefits everyone. And, I've said that negative stuff about things, and the same manufacturers still send me stuff because they understand I'm reasonable about it. How much do you think the Susvara should cost? Oh, that was an interesting one. I'll answer that quickly before I go to breakfast, as I'm should be at breakfast already. Susvara should... Okay, here's the thing about China versus us out in the Western countries, is that when people shop in China, they expect to get a discount. This is what I've been relayed to me by Chinese friends, and I've had when I sold stuff in a flea market, when I had Chinese customers try and badger me down. Stuff is sold with the expectation that they will not pay full price. So the fact that the Susvaras are $6,000 assumes that they will not actually be sold for $6,000 in China. So people will obviously pay much, much less. So if in the Western market, though, they would be $3,000. So if that gives you an idea. So that's probably, I said $3,000 for the Susvaras, and the 2300 or something like that, 2500 for the HE1000 V2s would be closer to kind of sensible and reasonable. That was my opinion anyway about the Susvaras. And so, people paid $6,000 for them. But also, the average wage in China versus the average wage here is kind of really different in Western countries. So, some people have big speaker systems. Someone plugged them into a pair of Krell amps. Well, yeah. When connecting the M scaler, do you connect the USB connector to the laptop for digital music? You connect USB to the M scaler, and then you connect the dual coax to the Dave. That's how it works. The M scaler has a separate power supply, a separate power wall wart, and that's how you connect up the M scaler like you connect up a DAC to your computer. But then when you're connecting, the M scaler has dual coax outputs which go to the Dave. The Dave and the M scaler are only connected that way. Once you get them, you'll figure it out. Just make sure you do get the coax cables, but you'll be fine. I'm sure there are instructions in there, and I've never heard of anyone having issue connecting them up. So it's like the M scaler is like the best USB to SPDIF converter ever made. If you think of it like that, an SPDIF converter, and I have one sitting in the drawer here. This is like you have USB in from your computer, and this is a SPDIF out to a DAC. An M scaler is just like a very, 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 very fancy version of this. So that's right. It'll be fine. And I totally envy you. I want the same setup. Okay. You're going to have a great time. I'm going to go in a bit. So, yeah, sorry if I speak too fast. It's just my normal way of... I have to slow down my videos too, because you may not, if anyone noticed, I actually slowed down one of my videos in software because I was speaking too fast. But hi, nice to see people from Russia. I'm going to head off, so I'm going to have breakfast. I ate a whole banana when I got up at 5:30. So thanks everyone for watching. Do note, where is my... I do have a site. Where is my... Okay. It's kind of white on the up there because everything's now lighter. Maybe I should move it down. But you see up there this cool thing, this sign. Where do I have something I can cover it? I'm going to be tricky. If you can read it, hold on. Let's just put that in the way so you can read that. amos.io/join. There you go. If you'd like my advice anytime, I actually have a Discord too. I don't have it open because we want to keep it kind of quality, not quantity. And, we chat in there and have fun, and people ask my advice. And if you're going to be spending a lot of money, even do consider supporting me, and it helps me make the reviews and helps me do this. And, if I need things like I need a new microphone, it covers for that kind of thing as well. It covers my electricity bill. The electricity bill is impressive. And that kind of thing. Actually, more for the air conditioning. And giving away stuff too. I didn't give away anything this morning. I actually been going to give away. I actually have a lot of stuff that is just not used anymore, and it's not current model, or it's not useful for comparisons or whatever. And I want to give it away. So the interesting thing is, I also have a Patreon, but I don't use the Patreon, which is why I set up my own member site. Because Patreon actually doesn't allow giveaways. So the other thing is, there were a lot of issues with Patreon. I lost, for all the supporters, I lose 10%. A lot of issues, the limitations. The funny thing is, I posted a thing saying I have a live stream coming up. Does anyone have any questions? And I click, and it's when is the live stream? I put the time of the live stream post, and then I found out it hadn't been posted. It actually was the post wouldn't appear until the live stream started. It's like, what? No, I want the post to appear before, so people can actually write me questions for the live stream. And just infuriating system. So I took months to build my own system, which is the member site, which is secure. And so if you'd like to help support me and join the community, and that'd be really cool, and help me out, and I'll help you out. So that's the URL up there, the join URL, the short URL, and it's on all my videos as well. So thanks, thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to head off now to breakfast, and see you all online, and for the next review and next live stream, which should be in about a month.